evening and welcome to WPSU's Vote 18. Over 3 weeks, we've been talking with the candidates running for the U.S. House to represent Pennsylvania's 12th, 13th, and 15th congressional districts. Today, the focus is on the 13th district. Two candidates are vying for the position, Republican John Joyce and Democrat Brent Ottaway. We'll be speaking with Brent Ottaway. John Joyce declined to join us for an interview. Welcome to WPSU's Vote 18 Race for the 13th District. Today we're talking with Brent Ottaway, the Democratic candidate in Pennsylvania's 13th District. Ottaway is on the faculty at St. Francis University. He's director of a study abroad program and has served on the Hollidaysburg Area School Board. Brent Ottaway, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for the opportunity.
You've pointed to the importance of education as one of the major focus points of your campaign. I don't have to tell you that the cost of higher education continues to go up, and that means increasing levels of debt for many students and their families. What role do you see government having in addressing that?
Well, it's a complex issue, and you're right, you don't need to tell me. I have two kids in college at this moment. There are many things that need to be done, and I think some of them within higher education, they're starting to contain costs more. But as far as the federal government, I think that more guaranteed loans need to be made available, that legislation needs to be passed that student loans will be treated much like other debt, and for example, in bankruptcy court and so on. But that's just one part of a broad spectrum of education that needs some work.
Pennsylvania ranks near the bottom when it comes to contributions for higher education on a per capita basis, students going to public schools, public universities. Do you think states like that should have to chip in more?
I do, yes. Personally, yes. I don't think Congress should mandate that. I think that's a state level call, and people choose where they want to live. But as a Pennsylvanian, I'm dismayed by how little the contribution is.
On the topic of education, you point to your experience as a faculty member, former school board member, and as a parent, and you said you'd like less emphasis to be put on standardized testing. How do you think we should measure how effective schools are at teaching children?
Well, there are various measures, and I'm not saying that there should be no testing, but ever since the No Child Left Behind Act, it has been vastly overemphasized, and to the detriment of the schools. I know many teachers who have gotten out of the business. The life has been squeezed out of the classroom, and I've seen that as a board member, as a parent, and as I was also on the board of a private Montessori school. So I've seen education from various approaches.
If we're not talking about standardized testing, though, what alternates are available?
Well, there are more holistic ways of looking at things. There's, you can look down the road at outcomes, and you can also, you can still evaluate teaching without putting so much emphasis on the student scores.
In writing about your positions on issues, you said that you want to end Washington's war on the future. What did you mean by that? Well,
I am not alone in being frustrated with Congress's short-term perspective. Everything, the typical representative sees the future as between now and the next election, and I think we need to look well beyond that. For example, the recent tax cuts for the wealthy that were passed by this Congress, there was not much attention paid to how we'll pay for that, and so that bill is going to come due. And to the extent that it is going to be paid for, they've talked about cutting benefits elsewhere. And so that sort of short-term thinking follows also in areas such as environmental concerns and just about any decision that comes out of Washington.
How would you change that if you were elected? What approach would you take?
Well, I'm not highly partisan. In fact, I've spent most of my voting life as a Republican, and I felt that the party left me more than I left the party. The fiscal discipline that I thought was part of being a Republican is long gone now. And I'm someone who works across the aisle in my various roles in public service and in administration and so on, I've worked well with people I tend to disagree with, but I recognize the need for the messy but important work of compromise, working together, and basing the discussion on fact, not alternative fact, reaching a conclusion that's for the best of the people, not for those in the room.
You are a registered Republican. Why did you decide to change parties?
There were various factors involved, but as I mentioned, I became discouraged with the Republican Party, which I used to think of as the one that stood for fiscal discipline, and that's not been true, since certainly the George W. Bush administration and the current administration are both, spending without much concern for covering those costs. And
so that prompted you to switch parties?
Yeah.
And you said you consider yourself a moderate Democrat. What do you mean by that?
That's a good question. Yes, moderate because I believe, and well, that's the wrong way to put it. It makes it sound like Democrats don't want to pay for things. But I do believe in balancing the budget. I believe, I don't believe that we can at this point make education free at all levels, for example. But I do think we can do more. I think everything is on a continuum, and I'm more toward the middle, more centrist on that than most of the Democrats I know, and most of the Republicans in this district are, at least the politicians, way to the other side.
So you wouldn't take the Bernie Sanders approach to higher education and say students should be able to have that paid for? No,
not at the four-year bachelor's and up level. I do think there's something worth looking at as far as community college degrees. We need more vocational programs. We need to do a better job of retraining people who have job changes, because that's happening more and more.
Right, there's a real shortage in some of those more technical fields with people retiring.
Right.
What sparked your interest in running?
Well, it's a long-term interest. My late wife, Ellen, and I talked about doing this for more than 20 years. Our part of what is now the 13th District has been represented by a Schuster since the 1970s. And we found it discouraging, although we knew and liked the Schusters, and they did some good things. In principle, it is wrong to not have a choice when you go to elect a member of Congress. This is not a precinct position who's going to work at the polls. This is a very important thing, and it is not intended to be a dynasty. And so the Schusters held it for a long time, and now they've chosen the person they want to continue. That's not me, but at least I'm out there giving people a viable choice, someone who will work for the people of the district.
And it is a very red Republican district. The political analysts would look at the race and say that your opponent, Republican John Joyce, odds are that he's going to win the campaign, but you've said that you think you have a real shot at winning. Why?
Well, I think the timing is right. Congress has an approval rating lower than President Trump. It's 17% last I looked. And there's a reason for that, and it's the partisan nature, the bickering, the moving into the two separate camps and refusal to work together. The American people are ready for representatives who will go there and do their work, not do the bidding of the party or an ideology, but do the messy business of making reasonable decisions based on fact to move the nation forward. So I think the timing is right for that.
WPSU asked our listeners and viewers for questions, and we got this question from a member of the public. What is your view on climate change?
Climate change is real, and it is happening, and the overwhelming evidence is that humans are contributing to it. And I think it's a sad commentary that question even has to be asked, frankly, at this point. Certainly the people making our laws should be past the notion of questioning climate science, because that is in. I try to live the part. For example, I get my electricity from solar panels in my yard and have for a couple of years now, and I do think that we need to address this issue for many reasons, from national security to energy policy to the economic benefits of it.
Are there specific things you think the government should be doing to address it?
Oh, absolutely. For one, withdrawing from the Paris Agreement was a terrible idea.
The climate change agreement that President Trump withdrew from?
Right. That was a terrible idea. The world is working together on this very important issue. The UN just came out with a new report about how soon the damage from climate change is going to have an impact and the extent to which it is. And it's scary stuff. So our country needs to do more. We need to encourage more alternative energy usage and look to the future. And that's also an area of job growth. A lot of people don't know it. Solar industry employs twice as many people as the coal industry already.
That is one of the concerns, that if we're looking to address climate change, that it could cost money that not everybody has. How would you answer that question?
Well, you look at the big picture. Do we have money to put up dikes around the whole coastline? Do we have money to pay for damage from more and more catastrophic storms? You have to look at the big picture, and that gets back to my notion of looking long term. I'm not in this for my next reelection. I'm in this to make decisions that are for the good of the country over the long haul, for our children and grandchildren.
You've also said that you would devote time in Congress, if you were elected, to increasing the efficiency and bettering our healthcare system. What steps do you see yourself taking?
That is, frankly, the healthcare is the biggest issue I've encountered on the campaign trail. People I talk to everywhere have horror stories of not being able to get care or having it wipe out their savings and so on. Americans deserve quality health care. That requires the two parties to work together. I will work with anyone from any party who's willing to move it forward so that we can have health care for all. It can't be a partisan issue anymore, and I think Americans are starting to see that and to demand that be finished up, and that's what I'm here for.
Do you see the Affordable Care Act as something that was a step in the right direction, or no, it's something that you think needs to be scrapped and we need to start over?
It was absolutely a step in the right direction. The status quo, people have to remember, the status quo was not going to work. It was not working. And at that time, one party chose to work on a solution and the other decided for political advantage to stay out of it. Well, now that they have control, that Republican Party found out this is harder than it looks. So my opponent, for example, toes the Republican line, saying, I think his term of choice is shred, wants to shred Obamacare. And there's nothing to replace it with. So I think what we need is a bipartisan effort. Something this big has to be solved by parties working together, and I think the people are finally angry enough to make that, to motivate us all to do that.
Are there particular things in it that you're hearing from people that need to be fixed that you would focus on?
Extending it to everyone is the main thing, and how that happens. I've seen and talked with a lot of people who have interesting proposals that include private enterprise. They don't make it all a government operation. Of course, the ACA doesn't do that either. So there are many plans. I think at this point, we don't need people coming into Congress saying, I have the solution. We need people saying, I'm going to work for the solution, and that's where I am.
Being fiscally conservative means finding places to cut spending. You can't always look at increasing spending and hoping it'll pay for itself. Are there particular places that you would look to cut spending? You think that the government spending can be cut?
Yes, there are areas where it can be cut, and some of them include defense, where we spend more than the next dozen or more countries put together, and most of those are or were allies, and we can do better than that. Diplomacy, rather than deploying, is a way to be more efficient in how we handle such things, with a few other benefits to it as well. Other areas we cannot continue to give tax cuts to the people who don't need them, to the wealthy, the way the recent Tax Act did. And I think people see that for what it was. It was promised as help for the average person. That's not been the case. It's been for the wealthy and for the corporations who used it to buy back their own stock.
Would you repeal those tax cuts if you were elected?
Definitely, we need to revisit that. And yes, the tax cuts are more needed by regular people. You should not need a bachelor's degree or more to make a living wage in this country. And we can use tax policy to help make life more manageable for people, to improve the quality of life for people, instead of just adding to the quality of life of the upper 1% or 10%, the way this tax cut did, with 83% of its benefits going to them.
It's one thing to criticize things from the outside, but it's another when you're in office and you're the one who has to get things done. Is there an example of something that you've done, a concrete project or initiative that you think really made a difference?
Yes. I'm just trying to think of where to go with this. Some of the things, my family was involved with a fundraising and helped to start up a fundraising, what's become a nonprofit for pancreatic cancer. I have, at St. Francis, I've taken on some difficult battles with over things such as the general education program when I was Dean of General Education, and faculty wanted to cut that. I was faculty athletics director when there were controversies about evening exams and athletes having difficulties with that. That's a lot of inside baseball, but the point is I have a knack for working with people, working through problems and finding solutions, and that's what I'll bring to Congress.
What would you say to the voter who looks at the economy in Pennsylvania and nationally, says unemployment is way down, the economy is humming along, why do we need to change? Things are going well.
Well, I think that question needed to be asked before that tax cut, frankly, because the trends have continued. The trends after the crash, unemployment has continued on the same path, essentially, that it was already traveling. Essentially, the tax cut goosed the economy in a way that was not needed, and I think we're facing the repercussions from that right now. It's kind of like throwing all of I use this metaphor of a bonfire in our backyard. The kids like to throw all the kindling on there because it makes a nice, beautiful flame, but then you don't have kindling when you need it. And we didn't need the kindling that Tax Act added to this economy at this point. Things were moving along and continuing to grow.
Many dairy farmers in Pennsylvania and other parts of the country are struggling. What, if anything, do you think Congress should be doing to address that?
Well, dairy needs to be addressed. The farmers are telling me that the trade war, the tariffs, and everything have been a major issue. That's with dairy, with the soy farmers and others in the area. That we need to stop picking battles over these things. Tariffs are just taxes. They're an awkward and clumsy way to go about what could be better handled by diplomacy. And so I think that's one place to start. Another is making it easier for them to hire help, and that gets into the whole issue of immigration and the fact that the current administration doesn't want people coming to this country, and the fact is we need them to.
So it sounds like you're saying you would support some type of migrant worker program. That's an idea that has gained support from some Republicans too, who say those jobs aren't getting filled. So you'd back that as well?
Absolutely. There needs to be a policy that allows people to come in to work, say, work in the fields or work in agriculture or some other jobs that American businesses and farmers are having trouble filling. It's a win-win for everybody, and it enriches the country in many different ways.
The Farm Bill that's under consideration is a pretty broad piece of legislation, and one of the things that it includes on the House version of it and not in the Senate version is stiffer work requirements for people on the SNAP program, people who receive food stamps. What is your position on that? Do you think that that is a good idea to have stiffer work requirements?
I don't. I think that that is a mistake in this case, and I think if you look at various policies in the past and the people receiving those benefits, it's the vast majority of people are working very hard to get by and to raise their family, and that adding that complicating factor at that point in their lives is not the answer. It's just a way to deny that service to people who really need it.
Some Democrats have come out in support of ending ICE, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, and they handle deportation of undocumented migrants into the United States. Where do you stand on that?
I believe ICE has a role. I don't think, I'm not calling for it to be abolished, but I do think it needs to be, its role needs to be better defined and more limited. I've been to places in Adams County, for example, where ICE has conducted raids that have people afraid to move into Adams County. Even legal, people who have documentation are nervous about being in that area, and it's making things harder for the businesses in the region. This administration has gotten a little too far overboard.
The opioid epidemic is another issue that Pennsylvania and many other places in the country are facing, and there has been major legislative action on that, encouraging spending for more research, more tracking of it, and treatment options. What else, if anything, do you think Congress needs to do?
I do support that legislation. I think it was a good move. It's a little bit slow coming, but that's often the way it is with legislation. But more can be done, and I think more can be done in terms of big pharma and keeping them from pushing the meds as much as they have been. I also think simple things such as better regulations allowing physicians more flexibility in allowing people to, say, add on to a prescription by phone after a surgery, something like that. Then they wouldn't have to get them an entire bottle of an opioid. They could do it a couple of days at a time as needed, and that would help the battle.
What do you see as the most important foreign policy challenge that the next Congress will face? One of the most important.
Yeah, there are plenty. I think generally I would say it is going to be regaining America's place in the world. Frankly, the America First approach is putting America behind, and in every aspect. If you look at trade deals, the G7, you look at the Muslim ban, the promised wall, in the Paris Accord, the Iranian nuclear deal, and on it goes. Our position, America's position in the world, has been diminished significantly, and it's not hard to see that. And if you talk with anyone who resides in another country, they'll let you know. We are becoming less of a factor, and that's not helpful.
Midterm elections historically have very low turnout. What are you doing to spark interest in the race and get people to the polls?
We have, and this has been the fun part of this, is seeing how energized people get, and the number of volunteers who are out there knocking on doors, calling people, that is wonderful. I think because I'm someone who is running a grassroots campaign, no paid workers, we don't accept PAC money or anything like that. And I'm running against someone who benefited from PAC money, from dark money, from Coke money, from and his own riches, and so people, I think, are connecting with us on that count.
Many people would say that we're living in a very divided time in politics. Do you think we are? And if you do, what do you think needs to happen to change that?
I think we are living in the most divided time that I can recall in my lifetime. Yes, absolutely. And I think one thing we need to do is to agree that it's stupid. That we need to work together. And I had a farmer say the other day, well, there's this pendulum, and it goes from stupid on one side all the way past common sense to stupid on the other side. I think the American people are more toward the middle. and we need to stop listening to the extremes and electing people to Congress like me who are there to solve problems and not to play to some party ideology and so on. We need to talk and work and be able to talk and argue civilly over issues where we disagree.
We have less than a minute left, but can you talk about how you as an elected member of Congress would do this when you've been very critical of some of the steps that Republicans have taken? You've been critical of President Trump and your Republican opponent, Joyce. So how do you see yourself crossing that aisle?
Well, I think criticism comes with the territory, and I certainly am criticized even at this stage, and that does not mean that you cannot reach agreement and work together. And I've been criticized and have criticized colleagues at St. Francis when I was president of the Senate, and I had 15 very smart people, all knew everything about everything, trying to fight things out. And you can do it. It takes the will, and you need to be a reasonable person, and I am that.
Brent Ottaway, thank you so much for coming in and talking with us.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
We've been talking with Brent Ottaway, the Democratic candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives, 13th Congressional District. His Republican opponent, Joyce, declined to be interviewed by WPSU. To find out more about the candidates and watch other interviews, go to WPSU.org/vote18.